So, hello, and a very warm welcome to this special edition of Berlin Briefing that we're recording here at the Global Media Forum in Bonn. Max, co-host, we should maybe rebrand this Bonn Briefing for today. Just today?
Just today.
Okay, so let me just introduce you to what we've got here. An excellent panel, of course. Berlin Briefing, of course, for everybody who doesn't know, is our weekly go-to podcast for anybody who's interested in an English language discussion about all things German politics, Germany's role in European security architecture, and of course the German view on international events. And we've got some great people again. So Gerlinde Niehus is a former deputy director at NATO, and I'm really looking forward to your perspective on our topic today, which I will share with you in just a bit. Hello, Gerlinde.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
And Maximilian Meyer, you didn't travel that far because you're from the University of Bonn, professor of international relations. Really looking forward to your insights as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
So my name is Nina Haase. I'm DW's chief political correspondent based in Berlin. And we want to look today at sort of a constructive debate about Germany's role, Germany's leverage. What can Germany do to help shape Europe to tackle the challenges that are happening in the shifting world order? This is something I really want to go beyond the description of what's not working well, and I want your expert analysis on, where is the leverage that Germany has, because there are so many things that are not working at the moment. NATO is under pressure. The Americans, are they withdrawing? Are they going to stick with the alliance? Are they going to withdraw from Europe altogether, etc.? Then there are international new formats that are springing up because the UN Security Council is paralyzed, so people are looking into Donald Trump peace alliances. Is that something where Germany can apply leverage? Why isn't it taking more leadership? Or are we being too critical? Is it taking leadership? And let's just start with the worst news of the year. A couple of weeks ago, we did an episode, Max, about the reasons that were behind the UN Security Council vote, where Germany had tried to get in. Can you describe the situation, what happened a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, for everybody who, just a reminder, Germany applied for a non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council. They do that every 8 years. And then if you manage to get that seat, then you have the seat for 2 years. And Germany did that again this year, trying to apply for a seat that would have started next year. And they famously failed, although being pretty confident in beforehand that they had the necessary votes, just shy of 130 votes. But I think they ended up with 104 votes. So they were very far from that goal, although being optimistic beforehand. And I think you can fail. But the margin here tells the real story, right?
And Max, because you say, they were optimistic, and we travel with the German ministers, we accompany them sometimes on trips that, our employer has to pay for, but we do get to ask questions. And so you interviewed the German foreign minister, and he sounded really optimistic. And I would love to show you what Johann Wadefuhl told Max.
I think diplomacy still is very important for this world to prohibit the jungle, to win the race. Of course, we are under stress. The UN system is under stress. The whole international rules-based order is under stress. But we are defending the United Nations system. And there's no greater, no more important peace organization than the UN. So that is a very role also the Security Council has to play. Unfortunately, recently often blocked by others, but we see still the Security Council as the most important council where the core questions of peace, stability in the world are discussed and hopefully solved.
And I also asked him during that interview, what's your slogan for the campaign? What's the slogan for Germany? Why would anyone vote for Germany? He said, because we are a reliable partner. So the reliability of Germany that I guess the country has been famous for many years, and that slogan didn't work. And I think that's at the core of what we're talking about today.
Why didn't that work? Maximilian, I want to bring you in.
Yeah, I think there's multiple reasons why that didn't work. One of the reasons is that for many other countries in the world, it's unclear what Germany is actually standing for. It's unclear which strategy it has. For example, is it going closer with the US? Is it going closer with Israel? What is the German fundamental support for the UN system? That is unclear for a lot of countries. Plus, Germany has lost a lot of soft power in the world. That's going back to the pandemic and for other reasons. So there's many reasons why that slogan hasn't worked. And I think from a German point of view, maybe the most important one is it's unclear what is Germany's role in the world, and it needs to be redefined under this transitional world order we are currently living in, and which might maybe go on for decades. We don't know that.
And of course, you know, they defend themselves when we ask them questions, and they say it's also a hard truth that there are more autocratic countries around the world now. So this is something that we just have to live with, that a free liberal democracy is not that popular anymore. Gerlinde, is that something that you buy as an argument?
No, I wouldn't buy this, because you may call me naive, but I still think that the model of open societies, of therefore liberal democracies, democratic societies, in the end, is a model which allows those societies and states to learn quicker and to adapt to the need of reforms. So, and that in the long run, I think, is the superior model, because it allows the majority of its populations to come along. And I think that is the inherent strength of a democracy. And we should sometimes perhaps remind ourselves of that inherent strength. We tend to be too dismissive of the values of a democratic society.
And that brings me to the other big international organization, because we're talking about the threat to multilateralism as well, right? You are an expert of the workings at NATO. Can you describe to us just how much of a challenge is it for countries from, you know, liberal democratic societies in Europe to deal with the current American behavior at NATO?
Yeah, I mean, thanks to the US under Trump really drifting away, yeah, what we're seeing is that there is a wedge which has been driven by Trump between US and European security. Yeah, Trump's posture violates the NATO treaty, the UN treaty, the consecutive agreements on the strategic level taken by NATO. But most fundamentally, it undermines the very substance of an alliance, which is the mutual trust among allies. So that trust has evaporated. And because of this division which you now have in NATO, in essence, on a strategic level, you have a strategic freeze in key areas. So when it comes to the Russia policy, that is in a fridge. When it comes to the strategic orientation of integrating Ukraine into the Euro-Atlantic structures, that is going nowhere. When it comes to looking into how to build Europe as an actor, as a strategic actor with its own capacity to take action, also that is not happening within the NATO context. Yeah? So that doesn't mean that they are not working, the colleagues there. They do work on an operational level, but the big strategic issues are in the freezer.
And I accompany the German defense minister, Boris Pistorius, quite a lot on trips. And 2 years ago, he said, you know, if the Americans want to withdraw from NATO, it would be really good to have a roadmap where they say, okay, we have certain capabilities, but we need them elsewhere. We need them in the Indo-Pacific. And then the Europeans could essentially try and fill those gaps. How far along are they on that roadmap?
Well, I think that is, if I may, more the technical question. For me, the more important question is that Europeans need to learn how to organize joint strategic leadership. And that's where they currently, in my mind, are not yet at the level they need to be. They have trying around with various formats, the E3, the E5, other formats of coalition of the willing. But what is really lacking is a new formula of strategic leadership at a joint level. Because every individual country, be this Germany or France, is not capable of doing that. So we need that type of leadership group, or what the Commissioner Kubilius is proposing, a European Security Council.
So this is the European Commissioner. I think we're getting very nerdy here, so all you out there in the audience, if you don't understand a word, just shout, right? You know, let us know, because you mentioned the E3 format and the E5 and then the European Commissioner. So the E3 is, of course, Germany, Britain and France.
Yeah.
The E5 is those together with?
Italy and Poland, I think.
And Poland, especially when it comes to Ukraine support, right?
Yeah. Indeed, yeah, because you may have remember that Poland these days rightly criticizes for being left out of the Ukraine discussions, yeah, and I think they have a point.
And why is Germany doing that? Why isn't it including its neighbour into these crucial discussions? A neighbour that is sitting exactly on the border, that has a very, very strong situational awareness, if you want to use that awkward term.
Yeah, that's an important term, and there's also an important trust issue. That's a deficit which is not just the current coalition. Actually, the current coalition is trying to improve it, but the governments before that in Germany also had this deficit, not engaging much more with Poland. I really much hope that in the next years we can improve on that. There's a lot of potential to work together, bilateral in a NATO context, but also in the context of the European Union. The bigger question is whether the Europeans are moving forward in terms of a defense integration. And parts of that can be within NATO, parts of that will be outside of NATO. That's the really big question in terms of a constitutional change of the European system of the European Union, maybe also beyond that, because we certainly want to integrate the UK as well. So it's not just a European Union issue. And that's the big strategic question. First, what is the leadership? Second, what is the political construction around that? There needs to be decision-making institutions, and maybe the most important one, very few people are talking now about, is the question of voters. We also need to bring in voters and people in Europe to support that kind of vision. And I think there's the biggest lack of communication, you could say, in convincing a majority in Europe, in different countries, that we need to move forward. We need to integrate much more consistently and much deeper than ever before. And I think quite surprisingly, because historically, crises in Europe very often have driven integration steps in different policy fields. In the defense field, at the moment, this is happening a little bit, but much less than you would expect, given the massive crisis we are in.
But Max, you just said essentially that, you know, countries around the world don't really know what Germany stands for. And I said that I want a constructive discussion. Where is the leverage, right? What should Germany be standing for, and which specific steps are needed so that at least fellow Europeans understand, okay, Germany wants to head that way?
I think there's two main issues. One issue is inside Europe and what Germany will stand for inside Europe. I think at the moment we shouldn't throw out too much the idea that we have values and our foreign policy should be value-based. I still think that's really important. So just moving to total pragmatism really doesn't work. It's also not credible, by the way. A lot of countries in the world expect Germany to be more value-based. So if we now shift to pure pragmatism, that's not going to sell. So there needs to be a balance in terms of that. Second one, Germany needs really to commit to a strategic vision. And in my point of view, that vision should be not a global vision. It should be a geographical neighborhood vision. And that should also be what Europe should do. Not focus on the global picture, focus on our immediate neighborhood towards the east, of course, defending against Russia, an extension of European Union at the Baltics and towards the south, and also the Mediterranean as a major field where there's so much instability and there's so much political, strategic, military, economic focus needed. And that should be a more narrow focus. So in a way, you could say neighborhood first policy. And Germany should also commit to that. Germany's neighborhood, most importantly, is France, Poland, Denmark, and other countries. So that should also be a more narrow focus for German policy, foreign policy as well. On the global level, I think Germany needs to do two things. One is supporting multilateralism, and not like we had after USAT, the failure of getting the non-permanent seat saying, oh no, we stop funding now. That's really not the way we can conduct as a middle power. The other thing is keeping more options and developing more options, which means working together with other middle powers around the big actors, around China, around the US, and building new coalitions with democracies and with authoritarian countries to enable us to have more partners around the world. And that combination, I think, will be a good strategy forward.
If I may here, but that's kind of what Germany is trying to do.
Is it?
It is. I mean, if you look at what the foreign minister is doing, where he's going, if you look at the different economic treaties, trade treaties that are emerging, that's kind of the plan.
Well, trade treaties are not done by Germany, right? They're done by the European Union. So
yeah, but Germany within the European Union being an important actor and all that.
And it is negotiated at the Brussels level. You have to look what we're really investing. So, for example, how much are we going to do together with countries such as South Korea, Japan, Brazil? What are the big projects we are really pushing? What is the larger global vision we are pushing for? There is not a very clear sort of direction or objectives we want to achieve. And I think there is some movement in that direction, work together with other middle powers, but the scope of that and the ambition we have is much too small, right? Compare that, for example, with India or with Singapore or with some of the countries in the Middle East, in the Gulf. They have a much larger strategy towards other middle powers, and we're lacking that still.
And that is something that's also affecting NATO and the defense area, the lack of strategy, but also the feeling of being intimidated because of US threats, because the Europeans are aware that ultimately the Americans do have the lever, right? I mean, this is something, Gerlinde, that people are struggling with at NATO when it comes to trying to impose a more European pillar within NATO as well.
Yeah, I think we have to realize in Europe, when it comes to the former partnership with the US, that we are on our own. Yeah, and in that context, I think we also need to realize that if we want to have any chance in the big power play between Putin, Trump, Xi Jinping, the only chance we have as Europeans is if we stick together. So even big countries such as Germany or France, if we try to do it on our own, we're not going to get anywhere. So in my mind, we need, in that sense, a paradigm shift. We need to think European first and then the national perspective. I know this is pretty radical, but I think
it's not at all what's happening.
But I know, but this is, in my mind, what is needed. Because when you look at Europe and its strengths on a global scale, the biggest challenge we have is fragmentation. And fragmentation concerns everything. It concerns the military, the defense, the society, the competitiveness, the digital technology everywhere. So wherever we are, innovation, I could go on. So wherever we are fragmented, and we are fragmented in nearly all these areas, we are losing our weight, we are losing our edge. Yeah? So the need to integrate more is, in my mind, paramount.
And this is something where dependencies will be exploited by people who, see an interest in dividing Europeans. And this is something where you're also a crucial researcher when it comes to those new tech dependencies. When it comes to all those new software models and AI, with Anthropic essentially being taken off the market for non-US consumers. How much of a vulnerability did that expose, Max?
Yeah, Anthropic is a really nice example. I mean, Anthropic itself can be used. Just the most cutting-edge model is currently no longer usable, but it shows that kind of kill switch idea that there can be a decision in the White House, maybe from one person, and that can end for millions or potentially hundreds of millions of users worldwide, not just in Europe, also elsewhere. Just stop overnight or within an hour, whatever they relied on. And a lot of companies are already affected by that. And these kind of kill switches are basically in all, or in many, many digital systems, let's say. They haven't been used so far, but given we have this trend of more weaponized interdependence, we have to assume they might be used more often for leverage reasons, but also for other reasons. On Anthropic, I think it's a bit more complicated, the story, because, I mean, there were two reasons given, right? One reason was national security. The other reason was safety. And we will probably see something like that for more AI models in the future, that they are too dangerous, or we find out they cannot be controlled, so they have to be taken off for a moment.
And that's not just marketing speech to make them sound more interesting.
No, I don't think so. So there's a real thing there, and therefore it's a bit more complicated picture. But generally, I think it's important for Europe to acknowledge how big the dependencies are, and the European Commission is doing that. They're working hard to sort of come up with a plan how to realize digital sovereignty as a goal. But the gap is huge, right? For example, if you look at platforms, social media, Europe is more or less 90% dependent or even higher on mostly American platforms.
Yeah,
Cloud,
but the French are
thing.
doing it differently. What is Paris doing that Berlin isn't and cannot, won't?
Because Paris has strategic culture and Germany still doesn't have it.
Industrial policy.
And we also will see how this works. For example, I mean, the French government has decided to decouple from Microsoft, right? And Microsoft is one of the big providers of software, which is used from all kinds of different actors, universities, companies, the government, and so forth. So is there a replacement for Microsoft in one package? No. It has to be built from many, many different sources. Is that going to work? We will see. It's maybe not as efficient. It's maybe much more expensive. It's maybe not as cyber secure as you want to be, top systems. So in 2 years, we might see the French government going back to Microsoft, right? So I think I would be a bit more careful in replacing that overnight, but the general strategic goal is clear. We need to cut down on some of these dependencies. I would, for example, say for Germany, let's never use Palantir. Let's just not use it by default, like Switzerland, like many others. By the way, also Israel is not using Palantir for good reasons.
Do you mean authorities, government, ministries, etc., but also normal consumers?
Also normal consumers, exactly. So that means Microsoft, we also so much dependent, so we cannot change that overnight. But we don't need to build new dependencies if it's not absolute need to have. And I think Palantir we really don't need.
Okay, so we can talk about, some more specific advice when it comes to NATO reform. Gerlinde, what should Berlin do? I mean, Germany, when it comes to the defense sector, is the one country where there is a lot of money at the moment. There's a lot of power, all the other sectors in Germany are not functioning that well, but defense, clearly a lot is happening. So what should they do there?
Germany is putting a lot of fresh money into defense. Yeah, that's true. And in that sense, it has a leadership role in NATO. There's a declared ambition to become the strongest conventional army in Europe, which is again also raising some eyebrows elsewhere, which again I think is unjustified. But when I'm just looking at the defense spending, over 75% of that spending is done nationally. And again, if it's done nationally, it means that there has been no real competition, so it is not necessarily spent in the most effective way. And brings me back to my earlier point. I mean, we are simply looking at it too much from a national perspective. We need to look at it from a European perspective. And yes, I mean, Germany could have, because we now have a National Security Council, for example, they could have taken the initiative to come up with a European security strategy as a proposal. Have they done so? No. Have they proposed, or have they taken the lead in the Europeanization of NATO? Well, they are contributing, but they are not taking leadership, and that is, in my mind, that's a pity. Yeah, because they need to build up this strategic culture, which is available in other countries, notably France and UK, but not to the same degree in Germany.
But there's kind of a contradiction in what you're saying, if I may, Gerlinde. That is, everybody seems to agree on a certain level what needs to happen in Europe for the European Union to be more resilient when it comes, again, everybody knew this had to happen towards China. Now the US is also a factor in this, Russia evidently as well. but it is not really happening effectively. And time is of the essence. So as a government of a certain country, you draw the conclusion, if it's not working in the European Union, the very least I can do is to make it happen on a national level. That would be the explanation, as opposed to nothing's going to happen, nothing of significance is going to happen on the European level. And that's kind of what we're sensing. You know, when you listen to to politicians, especially in the German government, they don't seem too hopeful that they can get the majorities needed or even unanimity to pass the things you described. That's why they're talking about getting qualified majorities and everything. But isn't it then the only conclusion they can draw? We cannot make it happen on the European level, especially looking towards France with elections next year. You never know what's going to happen there. So let's, at the very least, do it for our country.
Yeah, but I must say I disagree on that, that nothing is happening on the European level, because a lot is happening on the European level. I mentioned already the new European security strategy, which is now drafted in the President's office. Commissioner Kubilius, who is in charge of defense, is pursuing the European Defense Union, is pushing for the idea of a European Security Council, which has been picked up in the European Parliament, a new program which is aiding towards an integrated defense market is on its way. So there are numerous activities on a European level, which admittedly many are somewhat complex, convoluted in the European speak, so they don't translate easily and they are not easily to be marketed. But the perception that nothing is happening on the European level is simply wrong. And in many ways, this is good that the European Union is so much active in, if you wish, NATOizing the EU at a time where the parallel process is the Europeanization of NATO is taking place, but also in order to be eventually ready to take action in case we have a situation where NATO is so paralyzed that it cannot declare Article 5 collective defense in the event of an external attack. And that is the scenario for which we need to get prepared.
It can't, or some allies won't?
Well, assuming we have a situation where Putin would attack a NATO country and occupy small parts of a country, then theoretically NATO should declare Article 5 collective defense. Whether they will do this is unlikely or is questionable considering the posture of President Trump. So NATO may find itself completely paralyzed in that situation. Article 5 requires consensus. So all the more important is that on the EU side, and that brings me back to your point, they are looking into how can we activate the mutual assistance clause so that we are eventually in a position to take action in the event of an attack against NATO territory.
Maybe to add to that, in moving forward, I don't think it makes sense to think either or, right? So you need to have developments in NATO, in European Union, and outside of that. And so, for example, some of the investments, and I agree totally with you, totally nationalized. What we should have instead is small coalitions to build certain components which can then, in 5 years or 10 years, turn into a European army. Right, or into a European defense system. For example, cyber defense could be much more transnational, not necessarily at the European Union level, but among a club, and then later extended. Or take the drone defense system, or take other systems. No need to build national systems. I think there's a big danger, actually. If we build up national armies, not only Germany, but also others, and in 10 years, 15 years, we have a European Union driven by right-wing populist parties who can actually know that we don't have war again in Europe, because we have these highly armed and modernized systems in different nations. And therefore, I think there needs to be much more done in terms of defense integration, both defense industry, but also defensive systems and in the end, a European army. We need that. We need to discuss in this direction, and we need to convince people that this is the way forward.
I will continue to play the devil's advocate, Gerlinde.
Very good.
And that is, you started off in our podcast by saying all of this needs to happen, and kind of the vibe I was getting over here is it's not really happening. But now you mentioned a lot of things that are happening where you seem rather positive towards what the European Union is doing. So what is it? Or, you know, is it more like either or? Because I have trouble sometimes figuring out where we stand. It's always a question of interpretation, you know, especially with the European Union, but also with the Germans. It's like, are things even worse than we know? You know, what would really happen if Germany got attacked? Would we be completely defenseless? Are we so old we cannot have any kind of innovation? Or are things actually much better than we also in the press sometimes perpetuate? What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, when I refer to the lack of strategic leadership, I was referring to creating a body which is bringing together individual nations. When we talked about what is happening on the European level, we were talking about what the EU, under the EU umbrella, EU institutions is doing, and there a lot is happening. But the EU cannot, on its own, with the Commission or the European Commission, cannot provide that type of strategic leadership because it has a limited set of responsibilities and power. So in order to bring this to the next level, you need to bring together the nations in a new format. So there is no contradiction, at least not in my mind, in that sense.
Okay, and now I'll give you one more chance. If you don't have any questions, that's fine. You have a question, okay. Why don't you just go up to the microphone?
Yeah, thank you very much. My question is again concerning the defense tech industry, because we lately had the FCAS deal for the 6th generation fighter jet blowing up and countries going back to national constellations, with Germany now building its own fighter jet and France building its own fighter jet. And one solution or one idea that I heard could tackle this is building a European company, kind of like Airbus in the 1970s, where countries put their programs together to be a player also on the global level. Airbus is now arguably bigger than Boeing. And so my question is, how do you see this possibility, and what would need to happen for something like this to become reality?
I can say something about that. I think there's a sort of a intersection between industrial policy and the creation of possible national champions or European champions in various fields, right? Not just in the defense field. Whether we Europeans want to move down that road. Certainly in France we have this discussion. In Germany we have very different understanding of what a industrial policy should look like, right? It doesn't go together, and that's also one of the reasons why between France and Germany it's so difficult to do something together on that level. The other point is that the vehicle which really works, right? Is that the most efficient way to move forward, to create one big company which can do these kind of things? Clearly, in the case of the fighter jets, it hasn't worked out. And what I think, you can fail, as you said, right? That's totally okay. What I think is the problem, both sides, neither the French nor the German government have put an alternative on the table, what we do if that's failing. And I think the message of that is really bad, right? So even
joint procurement surely has to be the starting point, right?
I mean, but the joint procurement is another example, right? France accuses Germany of, like, so you still buy so much in the US, which is true. Right? So also there, the trust is totally gone between Germany and France when it comes to the redirection of procurement away from the US. Right? And so I think there's two questions. One is defense policy. Do we need these capabilities to develop them together? I think yes. The other side is industrial policy. Is that the model we want to move forward, not just in defense, but also in other areas? And there I'm not so sure, right? Whether on that side it makes really sense. Yeah.
But I think it's an excellent question. I think, you know, these kind of thoughts are the ones that give us ideas for future Berlin Briefing episodes. So maybe we should do a deep dive about Germany, French, you know, defense collaborations, strategic approaches, etc. in the future. And you have to make sure that you tune into that. And I thank you all very much, because that's all the time that we have here. This is a busy day. Other great DW podcasts are coming onto this stage here today. So thank you very much for attending. Thank you, Gerlinde. Thank you, Max. And thank you, Max.